The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We know that Republicans, and particularly white Republicans, are very, very worried about losing their country to Hispanic immigrants. And recent polling really backs this up. There's a significant number of conservatives and white Americans in general that admit that they're uncomfortable with the idea of a non-majority white America, which is already visible in public schools and will eventually be visible in the broader population. Another factor behind Republicans being so retrograde and recalcitrant on immigration and similar issues is racial math. Listen to this. According to U.S. Census data, prepare yourselves for some insane numbers. Only 13 out of 234 Republican-held districts are majority minority, meaning, let me say it a different way, all but 13 of 234 Republican districts have a majority of white people in their district. And you can take it even further. 95% of Republican districts are 51% or more white. 2/3 of Republican districts are 70% or more white. These numbers are pretty clear evidence as to why Republicans can afford to do nothing on immigration and to talk about things like the war on whites and Ebola coming through the U.S.-Mexico border. If you don't understand why Republicans are so scared of immigration, so unwilling to take policy positions that might appeal to minorities, it's in part because, due to gerrymandering, there just aren't very many minorities in their districts.
They're increasingly relying on the white vote. I mean, Phyllis Schlafly said that they should abandon the minority vote altogether. It almost seems like that's what they're trying to do with all this immigration talk.
Yeah, I mean, with the gerrymandering, Lewis, they if they had the chance, there's no doubt, they would redraw the districts even to even further exacerbate the percentage of white voters in their districts.
They're delaying the inevitable, and the inevitable is Republicans pandering to minorities. We'll get there because this strategy will not keep up.
Republican Congressman Stephen Palazzo has sent a Bible to all 535 members of Congress for what he calls decision-making purposes. Our staffs provide us with policy memos, statistics, and recommendations that help us make informed decisions, Palazzo wrote in a note with the Bible. However, I find that the best advice comes from meditating on God's Word. Please find attached a copy of the Holy Bible to guide you in your decision-making process. This is not against the law, right? Even though we have supposedly separation of church and state, there's nothing preventing the distribution of Bibles as a gift by a member of Congress to all other members of Congress. But if you were to, as a member of Congress, make policy decisions based not on the best interests and desires of your constituents, but instead on the arbitrary, supposedly sacred Word of God with regard to one particular religion, there is no doubt that that would be a violation of the separation of church and state. And as we see with issues like abortion and same-sex marriage and so many others, sex education, what a supposedly sacred text says should not be a part of your decision-making process. That's what Stephen Palazzo wants, though.
I think that he is absolutely right. I think that sending a Bible to everyone in Congress is a very powerful way to influence decision-making. It would certainly light a huge fire under my ass, and I would be very quick to think to myself, wow, I have to do something to make sure guys like this never get into office again.
Well, maybe, Lewis, fake conservative Christians should actually read the Bible in its entirety and actually follow it in its entirety rather than cherry-picking the convenient stuff, because if they did follow it in its entirety, their policy positions would become so ridiculous that they would be certainly voted out, because the only way that you can be a Bible-following Christian elected official who makes decisions based on the Bible is if you only make the decisions based on the Bible with a very specific number of issues. Because if you interpreted and applied the entire thing, you would be laughed, I think, even though we have a very significant right-wing Christian influence in this country, you would still be laughed out because of your positions on everything from mixed fibers to shellfish.
That's it. Even the most religious people in this country, the most religious Christians in this country, they all focus in on a few things that they think are really important within the Bible. No one really seems to cover it as a whole and talk about everything involved.
Congressman Stephen Palazzo spending time and money distributing Bibles for decision-making to all 535 members of Congress. We have an excellent program for you today. We have a great interview. We have 3 really interesting audience questions that we will answer for you at the end of the show. Glad you're with us today. Become a David Pakman Show member. Support the work we're doing. If this is valuable to you, if you like listening to this program every day or watching the clips on YouTube, support the work we're doing and ensure that it won't go away by funding it. Go to davidpakman.com/membership. We'll be right back.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. Liberalbias.com is now presenting weekly videos on the Liberal Bias Video YouTube channel. Check out Liberal Bias Video to learn all of the ways in which reality has a liberal bias. Today's new member of the day is Jay Luna. Jay, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. As you may have heard me mention once or twice on this program, we're mostly funded directly by the audience. So consider becoming a David Pakman Show member. The list of member benefits is long. It includes, of course, the world-famous award-winning bonus show. I mean, mostly the rewards we gave ourselves, but still, it is an award-winning bonus show hosted by producer Lewis. I am the sidekick. You also get the commercial-free podcast archive, the video archives of the show, the invitation to the David Pakman Show town halls. By the way, the latest has the next one has already been scheduled for September. So there's really any number of compelling reasons to become a David Pakman Show member. Go to davidpakman.com/membership. This week in show history, 4 years ago this week, Senator Ted Stevens was killed in a small plane crash in Alaska. I was at the time worried about an upcoming small plane flight, which fortunately was fine. He was the longest serving Republican senator in history, a guy that was often lampooned, mostly by the left, but even sometimes by the right, famous for his statement about the internet is not just a series of tubes that you can back a truck up to. Lewis, now when you think back to that particular crash, my recollection is that it wasn't a bigger deal at the time.
A bigger deal? You mean? I mean, just the death of the senator?
Yeah, in a plane crash. Yeah, I mean, at the time it was reported, but the reports were almost understated in a way.
Well, for some reason it wasn't a big deal. I mean, I guess we're kind of used to hearing about small planes going down, and I mean, Ted Stevens was certainly not the most highly recognized or most recognizable politician in this country. So I don't know, maybe it just slipped under the radar.
It's also incredible that Ted Stevens was in a different plane crash back in 1978, which obviously didn't lead to his death, but did lead to the death of his wife. And there are, of course, lots of conspiracy theories around a lot of these crashes. The more prominent ones, of course, are the ones that involve foreign politicians, heads of state, etc. And when we step back, we have to remember small planes, particularly those flying in these areas of Alaska, are at an exponentially higher risk of crashing than commercial planes flying not in the backwoods of Alaska. And we did recently a story, Lewis, actually pointing out in spite of the fact that there have been a handful of really publicized plane crashes recently in the last year, it's actually safer than ever to fly commercial right now.
I would feel much weirder about flying in one of these tiny little planes because these are the ones that go down all the time. And I don't know. I still think I would try to avoid these small planes at all costs. Would you?
Yes. I mean, given the option, of course I would. If you want to go certain places, you really have very little choice, right? If you fly to certain places in Alaska, for example, between some of those remote islands and remote areas, it's really just these tiny planes. And you just kind of have to choose either not to go to those places at all, which so far in my 30 years on this planet has been my choice, or to just risk it.
Well, I guess certainly your chances are you're still not going to go down. And I'm sure there are people in the audience here who are flying in small planes all the time. But I don't know. It freaks me out.
Just think, every commercial airline pilot at some point started in a small plane, albeit not necessarily in conditions like those that are common in the bush flying and mountain flying of Alaska.
But on that same note, not every person flying a small plane moves on to fly the bigger ones.
That's a very good point, Lewis. Yes, no question about that. 3 years ago this week, Lewis made some comments about his belief in the paranormal and predicting the future, which created just a crazy situation among the audience. It eventually led to us having a psychic in studio. We ran that interview on a recent Friday show, and it created all sorts of hullabaloo and titillation, I think, would be the best way to describe it, Lewis. At this point, let's first go to you, Lewis. Have your views on the paranormal changed at all since that incident 3 years ago on the program?
No. I still believe that in, I guess, what we would call the paranormal, and I still believe that some people have either psychic ability or psychic moments. And let me just tell the audience the definition of paranormal.
Please.
A general term used to define experiences that cannot readily be explained by the range of normal experience or scientific explanation. So let me restate this because I know this was a big deal. I do believe that science will one day be able to explain what I consider to be the paranormal.
So you don't believe that these instances of psychic ability that you believe in, you don't believe that they are beyond scientific explanation. You don't believe they are truly paranormal or magical or otherworldly per se. You just think that we can't yet explain them with the science we know.
Right, and how little we know about the mind. So I don't think it's magic. It's important to state.
Do you believe that psychics can predict the future, right? Because when we talk about psychics, and you've distinguished, Lewis, between so-called real psychics and fake psychics, there's the being able to read someone and know things about their past, and then separate from that, there's the predicting of the future. Do you believe in one or both of those?
Well, I guess you could say both, but I don't think that psychics, as we know them today, the real ones, the ones that actually, experience these things, have even a firm grasp on it themselves. The John Edwards types, that woman who was recently discovered to be a fraud. I mean, I think all those people are a joke. I don't think it's just as easily explained as they make it seem.
Now, Lewis, if you believe that someone could predict the future, it follows logically that the future is already knowable, correct?
You could say that. I guess that's I'm not really sure.
And if the future is knowable, would it not follow logically that humans do not have free will because the future has already been determined?
Maybe. You can speculate on these things all day.
But in other words, I'm not trying to speculate. I'm just trying to follow your line of reasoning. In other words, if the future can be predicted, there is a set future. And if the future is set, humans cannot really make decisions because their future actions have already been determined.
Like my thoughts on people with psychic abilities and people who have psychic moments, I just don't think it's that black and white. I don't think it's binary.
All right. Well, listen, ladies and gentlemen, there are Lewis's thoughts. It's very clear his views have not changed over the last 3 years. I would open it up to the audience, though. Did you have views 3 years ago, whether they were connected with the segment on this program or if you weren't watching us at the time separately? Did your views on the so-called paranormal 3 years ago change from then until now, either towards belief in that type of thing or against belief in that type of thing? Lewis, let's open it up to the audience.
Please, yes, any personal anecdotes would be greatly appreciated.
1 year ago this week, a Kentucky man shot and killed his wife to ease her pain caused by terminal breast cancer. Currently, the states that allow for assisted suicide are Washington, Oregon, Vermont, Montana, and New Mexico. There have been many unsuccessful initiatives in different states. Most votes on the matter were very, very close, sometimes being decided in state votes by just a couple of percentage points or less. There was actually a vote on this where we were in Massachusetts, and many people we know who we agreed on most of their political and social views actually had differences of opinion on this and with each other, with us. It was pretty interesting. What do you think about this, Lewis? Now, I mean, many people who want to end their lives are able to do so without the controversy that exists in this country if they live in other countries. Do you think the future will go in that direction for the U.S.?
I think it probably will, and a lot of people in this country who live in states where assisted suicide is not available, or even in states where it is available and there are just there's too much red tape, have the option of going to these other countries and finding an organization that specializes in this. So I think we are headed in that direction, but for some reason, it seems that medical doctors are overwhelmingly opposed to this, at least in the United States, which is kind of a big hill to get over.
Yeah, and anecdotally, my dad is a doctor. He was not in favor of this initiative when it was in Massachusetts. A friend of ours, his father is also a doctor. He was against it. Both my dad and our friend's dad, both very, very liberal when it comes to economics and fiscal issues and social issues, but still were not against that law, at least not as written in Massachusetts, which of course was part of it for some people.
It was, yeah, and I was surprised by that. But there's something about those professions. They feel like, I don't know, that they have a duty to help, and that, I don't know, maybe that's just an easy way out that doesn't make sense. But certainly, I am in favor of it.
I want to remind you, I did recommend the documentary Kevorkian to you about Jack Kevorkian, known for his assisted suicide, his suicide machine, I think is what it was called. It's on Netflix. It's elsewhere online. I will restate my strong recommendation of that film. It doesn't really make a political point on the issue of euthanasia, but it's just very interesting to follow Jack Kevorkian around, and the interviews with him are fascinating. That's this week in show history. Let's take a quick break. Plenty more coming up today on this Friday show, including your audience questions answered.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to The David Pakman Show.
Welcome back to the program. For today's classic interview, we're going to go back to Phyllis Schlafly's first appearance on this program. At the time, we, of course, knew about Phyllis Schlafly. We knew about her as this kind of a revered conservative voice of reason, and I use that term pretty loosely. And I actually remember being a little bit nervous before this interview. I just didn't know exactly how it was going to go. And interestingly enough, every time she's been on, she's been very, very pleasant. And depending on how I frame arguments to her, she actually will agree with really, really liberal stuff. Although sometimes I don't think she fully realizes that she's agreeing with a really liberal position. Let's go to Phyllis Schlafly's first appearance on the show. Joining me today is Phyllis Schlafly. She is an American constitutional lawyer, a conservative activist, author, and also founder of the Eagle Forum. Ms. Schlafly, it's really a pleasure to have you on today.
Hello, I'm very happy to join you.
I want to talk eventually about how you feel the House of Representatives is maybe being conned into passing parts of what you consider to be an amnesty bill when it comes to immigration. But first, I want to kind of contextualize that with some of your thoughts on immigration. We've covered some of your other interviews on the show before. There's two in particular that I'd like to draw your attention to and then kind of get your reaction. When you were speaking with Focus Today a couple of months ago, you were giving the Republican Party some advice, and that advice was the Republican Party should really focus exclusively on white voters. More recently, you were talking on the Clay and Marty show, and you said that Latinos don't understand the Bill of Rights, and that that's going to be really a problem for making Latino voters vote for Republicans. So I want to start with that second part first, if I may. As a Hispanic immigrant from Argentina myself, I found the comment a little bit offensive, but I found it inaccurate, more importantly, because when we think about Latinos in the United States, if they're undocumented immigrants, they don't vote anyway, so they wouldn't really figure into the strategy. However, if they are Latino immigrants and are now citizens, they actually had to pass a test in order to become citizens, and that's more than American-born voters have to do. So where did you get the idea that Latinos don't understand the Bill of Rights?
Well, my belief is that the American Constitution and Bill of Rights are absolutely unique in the world, and that nobody else really understands it. Nobody else understands free speech the way we understand it in this country, and all of our other rights that are spelled out in the Constitution. They don't understand that the purpose of our Constitution is to restrict government. Most constitutions of other countries are a list of things that the government is supposed to do for you. Our Constitution is a list of things the government cannot do against us.
But so let's
And it's nothing peculiar to the Mexicans. I don't think the Europeans understand it any better. We just simply have a unique system, and they better realize it. And that's why we have a great country, and that's why most of the rest of the world wants to come here.
So that was going to be my question, whether you thought it was unique to Latinos or whether it would apply to anyone. I'm hearing you saying it applies to anyone not born in the U.S. So then my subsequent question would be...
It's not a question of where you're born. It's a question of what you're used to in your own country.
Fair enough.
And if you're used to a government doing everything for you and running your lives, that's not America.
Let me then follow up on the second part of it, if I may. What do you think is the reason for why someone who, even if they're born in another country, actually has to take a test about the Bill of Rights and the Constitution? Why would they understand it less than someone who, just by virtue of being born in the country, is a citizen? In other words, does just being born here give you an understanding of the Bill of Rights that studying about it would not?
Well, I do think it gives you an understanding of the First Amendment. I think that in other countries, they can't talk about their government the way we talk about our government.
Well, but in many countries you can. I mean, there's some where you can't. But to say that if you're not born in the U.S., you don't understand free speech, that's assuming a lot of people in other countries are very, very stupid. I mean, it's a very simple concept.
No, it doesn't mean they're stupid. It's what they live with, what they're organized with. They simply have different systems of government and lifestyle. And I think that I certainly do believe that America is unique and better than any other country.
Ms. Schlafly, it sounds like you know quite a bit about some of those European systems, yet you weren't born in Europe. So you've been able to understand those systems. Why would someone from another country, maybe Mexico, not be able to really understand ours?
Well, if they come here and they take the test and they learn our language, and they learn what you're supposed to learn to become a citizen.
Yeah.
Sure, of course they can learn it.
Oh, okay. So when you said that actually Latinos don't understand the Bill of Rights, you're taking that back. If they've come here and they've become citizens, they had to take a test about it, and they do understand it.
Well, that's different. We were talking about amnesty for illegals.
Ah, okay. So let's get back to that. What if in your perfect world, Phyllis Schlafly gets to decide what is the immigration policy in this country, and you're able to reform it from where we are today to anything you'd like? What would you like to see?
Well, in the first place, I think the restricting of a country's borders is a matter of national sovereignty.
Okay.
And the Americans have every right to decide who and what and when and how many people we want to let in and on what terms.
Certainly.
That's just simply a matter of national sovereignty, and I support that. And I certainly don't think pressure groups should be telling us it's our duty to do thus and so.
Okay, fair enough. But so far, it's just a statement of fact. In other words, borders exist, immigration laws exist, and countries can decide their immigration policy. Fine,
Right.
no disagreement there. But you're very concerned about what you consider to be a con job of the House of Representatives to pass an immigration bill. So far, when I asked you what would you like to see, you've just stated you would like immigration policies to exist. They do. So what else would you like?
Yeah, well, I stand with the majority of the American people who believe that those who come to this country should obey our laws.
Okay.
That's for starters. And the people who come here illegally are not obeying our laws. And I think the American people absolutely demand that we lock up the border, make it secure before we discuss anything else.
Okay, so step one would be simply to make the border secure. Now, how does that tie in to the practicality and pragmatism of what we do with those who are undocumented in the U.S. now? Would you like to see them deported? What should happen to those people?
I don't know anybody who's talking about deporting anybody except criminals, and I do think the criminals should be deported.
Okay.
But I believe that we should absolutely institute E-Verify so that everybody who reports for a job has to present a legal Social Security number. If I apply for a job, if you apply for a job, you have to do it.
Right.
And I certainly think somebody who's come from some other country should have to do it too.
Okay, so and that would be something that would be imposed.
That would be one thing.
And Ms. Schlafly,
of course, the Congress has voted that, and they've never enforced it. The other thing they should do is make effective the visa tracking system, so that when these people come in on visas and then they never leave when their time is up,
right,
that we should get rid of them.
Let me ask you, Ms. Schlafly.
Under agreement for a specified time period, and they should obey the law. That is the law, and it's never been enforced.
Just to be totally clear, on the E-Verify, that you're really talking about something that is for the employer to be forced to do, correct? In other words, that if I go and apply for a job and my employer doesn't verify my citizenship, that's not my fault as the applicant, right? It's the employer who would be penalized.
Yeah, that's right. It's a duty on the employer.
Okay, so then my question remains,
and
which is
then he's not supposed to hire the person.
Absolutely.
Who can't comply with the law.
So again, what do we do about those who are undocumented and in the country now? In a perfect world, if you were to decide, what do we do about those people, those millions of people?
Well, they don't get jobs.
Okay, so they can be here, but they can't work.
They can't get a legal job. They
Right.
can't comply with the same law that you and I have to comply with.
But you wouldn't deport them, correct?
I personally think that problem would take care of itself. I have never, and I really haven't heard anybody talking about deporting anybody except criminals.
No, so I'm just asking, so if they can't, they're here, they're undocumented, they can't get a job, you imagine then they say, well, I'll just leave the country, is that, I'm just trying to understand the thought process.
Well, that's a very good possibility.
Okay, fair enough. No, this is exactly, they may sound like minor questions, but this was exactly what I wanted to ascertain. It's been fascinating. We've been speaking with Phyllis Schlafly. She's an American constitutional lawyer, conservative activist, founder of the Eagle Forum. Make sure to check out the Eagle Forum. Ms. Schlafly, truly a pleasure to have you on today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
It is Friday, and it is time for audience questions. Very, very exciting. We can answer audience questions that come via voicemail. 219-2DAVID-P is the number, or via email. The first one today is a voicemail question. Let's take a listen.
David, I'm calling because I think you and Lewis are two very intelligent, very well-educated, informed, and open-minded young men. And I'd like you to do maybe a special sometime or have a little segment where you talk about caffeine being a drug and whether or not it should be regulated by the federal government. All right, keep up the good work, you two guys, and take care. Bye.
We know, Lewis, and we've talked about stories where these caffeine pills and using large amounts of caffeine have actually led to significant health consequences. So the question is, should caffeine be regulated? If the question is, should Coca-Cola be regulated because it has caffeine in the same way that alcohol is regulated, I tend to say no. However, when we're talking about these caffeine shots and pills and super high concentrations of caffeine, I think that there has to be some government oversight because we know, factually speaking, that this can be really, really dangerous to people.
Perhaps in the same way there's oversight of alcohol. I mean, it's tough because, yes, these pills, the shots, the powder, all of this stuff can be very dangerous. At the same time, it's not too different from going to a Starbucks, getting their tallest coffee and having 3 or 4 shots of espresso added to it and pounding that whole thing. So I think it would be very difficult to regulate. Most people wouldn't do that. So, I mean, I guess I'm okay with it kind of being in the same category as alcohol, where certain things are regulated or banned, and there are warnings perhaps on a lot of the more, what's the term, potent products, that you would find in a pharmacy or a supermarket or something like that.
The other problem with this entire thing is the reason that this is even a question is because of what people are choosing to do with caffeine, right? If caffeine didn't become something where people say, let's see how much we can consume and concentrate into like one shot or a spray or a powder or a pill, and then see how much energy it gives someone or whatever the effects are. If people weren't trying to do this type of stuff, this wouldn't even really be a question, right? If we just had a situation where, yeah, some drinks have some caffeine, and that's kind of about it, we're not testing or pushing the limits, then it would be a very different situation, right? The reason that this is even a question is because people are actually being hurt by this huge mega caffeine consumption.
Right. And plenty of people become caffeine addicts. And I think that's very common. There are people who will start shaking if they don't have their coffee in the morning. It's very common. But a lot of the people who are abusing it and ending up, some of them ending up dead because of caffeine abuse, are people who have no idea that caffeine is even capable of doing the things to them that it did. So, we need to educate people, of course, and there should be at least some regulation.
I actually drink coffee very infrequently, and one of the few times I do is when I travel somewhere where there's significant jet lag. I will use coffee to try to get myself on the better schedule. And I'm going to Europe next week, as we've talked about. We're going into our summer break. Just a reminder, we're not going off the air. We're just going to be off for a little bit. Then we'll be back with you. And when you travel to Europe, you usually leave sometime in the evening. You get there at what would be sometime between 1 and 3 a.m. on the East Coast. Of course, it's 5, 6, or 7 hours later, based on where you are. It's time to have your whole day. Some people will just go to sleep when they arrive, and then that really is the worst thing you can do because it prevents you from getting on the local schedule. So when I get there, no matter how much I've slept on the plane, which could be not much or it could be a few hours, I will try to just be up for that day, and I will actually have an espresso or whatever and just kind of help me get to that night. Because if you can get to that first night, Lewis, and actually go to sleep at a somewhat reasonable time, you're in way better shape for the rest of the trip. But of course, I would not think of having 4 espressos. I would have 1 and then just be up for a few hours.
Well, because neither one of us consumes caffeine or large amounts of caffeine regularly, we have no tolerance. You would probably be very, very sick if you had 4 shots of espresso, and I would be too. And I've done that to myself with Red Bull. drinking Red Bull and Jaeger, and it was not fun. You end up feeling terrible. But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, the only time I really get a coffee is when I'm just really, really tired and still have a lot of things to do, and I'll just get like a small coffee, and that's it.
Eric wrote in. Eric's question is, what are some fads or phases you and Lewis went through as a child? I have a couple of interesting ones. So there was a period where when we were in 5th or 6th grade, it became really popular to wear basketball jerseys to school, right? You remember this, Lewis, I'm sure, the basketball jersey trend. So there was a period where my parents were like, we're not buying you jerseys, or you're not going to wear them, blah, 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 blah. And on vacation, I think we were on vacation in South Carolina, and that was somewhat close to where the Charlotte Hornets played, and I think it was Larry Johnson who played for the Charlotte Hornets. My details may be totally wrong. I got a Larry Johnson jersey, and I wore that thing. Once it got warm, I wore it like every day to school. I had that, and then I had an Anthony Hardaway jersey, and I would alternate those all summer. I would just wear those two. I was obsessed with the jerseys for like 1 year, and then I got over it pretty quickly. I don't know what other fads I've really been or phases. Can you remember any, Lewis, that you went through? I mean, obviously we heard about the gaming addiction.
Oh, the gaming. I mean, I skateboarded for a while.
Oh, that's right.
I did that for quite a while, and I really enjoyed it. And I wasn't that good at it. I mean, I could, I was good at it enough to want to keep doing it, but that was one thing. But they were mostly like small little fads or phases. Like there was the Tamagotchi phase where we all had Tamagotchis. And
I don't even know what that is. I didn't have them.
You know, that tiny little oval thing. It was like a little fake pet.
Huh.
It's like your pet. It's like 2 pixels, and you have to take care of it, and it beeps, and you have to feed it. And I think the only reason I got one is because I found one, and I just tried to kill it as fast as possible every time. But because you don't care about a pet if it's 2 pixels.
Lewis, though, there was one other phase that we were both involved in, which is for a while we were very interested in making fires.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Now, I wonder, looking back, I should ask my dad next time I talk to him, was he worried that I was going in the direction of pyromania when I was into the making fires? And they were really pretty harmless fires. I mean, what we would do is in my driveway, if I recall correctly, we would grab a few sticks and leaves and then just grab a little bit of rubbing alcohol and then light it all up and just throw little things into it. And that was basically it. Every once in a while, we would put in like an old plastic Lego, which we knew we weren't supposed to do because the smell was toxic, the fumes were toxic, but we would just do it and stand away from where the fumes were going. That was basically it, right?
I'm going to bring up something else too, but yeah, we made fires. I think all my friends, our whole group, we all made fires, and I think little boys just like to play with fire. We actually used to melt patches of your driveway.
I think they would just get a little soft.
Well, that's melting. Come on. The cement went from a solid into a liquid. We'd burn Legos, we'd burn little GI Joes and toys, we'd burn ants, but we also used to take Legos and shave them on your treadmill.
Oh, that's right. For a while, we thought that was hilarious. Yeah, so there was a treadmill in my parents' basement, and we would turn it on really, really high. And we would just take Legos and push them up against the thing, and it would basically buzz off some of the piece. And we would usually do it with characters, so we could like remove a guy's hand or remove a guy's leg or his head. Yeah, but that wasn't really a phase. I mean, I remember doing that once.
No, but I think it just fits in with the whole fire, toy destroying, just overall destructive young boy phase.
Yeah, and I would step on ants as a little kid, but it never went to anything further. Like I know some kids, using a BB gun to shoot squirrels or whatever. I never went to that. And actually, I started feeling weird about killing spiders pretty early on also. I mean, now I will just flush a spider down the toilet when it's in my place, but I don't, go around looking to step on spiders.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess that pretty much covers it. Unfortunately, we were not, I don't know, I guess we weren't conformists to the highest degree.
Martin wrote to me. Martin said, I'm interested in the day-to-day lives of Americans. There's a lot of media I see is from the US. I'm in Britain. It makes the US seem like a caricature. The media I see, by the way, is mainly You and the Young Turks, some Sam Cedar, other progressive outlets. The only satellite provider in the UK, B-Sky B, which is partly owned by Rupert Murdoch, also carries Fox, so I enjoy that pantomime on a daily basis. The central subject of my email is about the New York City transit system. I noticed that you seem to have difficulty due to the popularity of the service. The same is true of the Tube in London. My local light rail is also called the Metro, and it has really spacious cabins, but is a fraction of the size of the New York subway. What is it actually like on the New York subway? Do you have any idea how long it takes to travel from one end of the longer lines to the others? It seems like days. Okay, very good questions. The subway really works pretty well here in New York City, okay? Now, it's different depending on where you live. I live in an area of Brooklyn that has 9 subway lines. So I have the primary one that brings me to work. There's another one at the same station that gets me 3 blocks away instead of 1 block. And then if both of those were for some reason delayed, I have another one that is at a different station in Brooklyn, and it would leave me 5 blocks from the studio. So I happen to be very lucky as far as that goes. There are some people who live, for example, in the neighborhood of Williamsburg in Brooklyn, who have one subway line that takes them to Manhattan. There was a period where every weekend, that particular line was closed from Brooklyn to Manhattan. Thus, instead of being able to get on a 3-minute subway to go from Brooklyn to Manhattan, you had to find a bus that would take you over a bridge. It could take 20, 30 minutes depending on traffic. You had to walk a long distance to a different line that would take you all the way around Brooklyn and into Manhattan via a different line. If you live in one of those areas, it can be seriously chaotic. So while it runs well, depending on where you live, your day-to-day can be affected. The other question is an interesting one, Lewis. How long would it take to travel from one end to the other on the longer lines? The A line in New York, which goes from the very tip of Manhattan, I believe, inward, or it may even be the Bronx, all the way through Manhattan, all the way out into Brooklyn, and ends out beyond JFK International Airport. It is a 31-mile line, is my understanding. And I don't know how many hours it is. I mean, it is many, many hours to go from one end to the other. I'm sure there are people who have to actually make that commute. I'm sure with millions of people living here, their commute might be inward to JFK International Airport, for example. And in that case, it is really, really bad. But remember, it's a long distance. It would take you a long time to drive anyway, right? It's not because of the transit system being slow that it would take you so long. So that's kind of the scene. I think, Lewis, where you are, there's very little public transit.
Right. There is very little, pretty much only buses and one little rail system. Austin is booming, and they don't have and are not setting up the infrastructure to deal with it.
Yeah.
Austin's going to be a total disaster. But for me, I've been to New York City many times, and the subway is absolutely necessary. It's a necessary system. I guess it works pretty well overall, but it's always very crowded. It's very dated. Everything stinks. You're constantly surrounded by people who stink and crazy people, and it's very uncomfortable.
So Lewis, being someone who rides every day, much of what you're saying is wrong. So you may have been around near rush hour on certain lines. Like, for example, the 4-5 line is the only line on the east side of Manhattan. Thus, it's serving 2 to 3 times the population that the 3 lines on the west side serve. So the 4-5 gets very busy. When I come to work, it's pretty busy. The other lines, and sometimes I'll go on a different line if I'm going somewhere else, are really not very busy. Sometimes at rush hour they get busy, but generally the trains are not very full. As far as being dated, since the last time you were here, much of the many of the lines have been totally redone with new cars, right? So yes, of course, it's the same tracks, but all of the cars are very, very new. There are some lines that still have old cars, but they are new cars. They're all air conditioned. They have digital advertising and station stop boards and the entire thing. So I think you'd be pretty shocked to see how different it is right now.
Well, certainly I've been on cars that are almost empty, and I know that there are stations that are not as busy, but overall, you have to admit it's pretty chaotic.
No, I mean, it is as a tourist. When I used to come here for the day, I would be like, I don't know how people deal with this. But once you understand the system and you're not always going like everywhere where it's really busy, which people tend to do as tourists, it's really not bad. I mean, in fact, compared to the Boston T, which I have a lot of experience with, I prefer the New York subway. It comes far more frequently. The cars are far bigger, and it reaches much more of the city. So I think that you'll have to come visit and revisit these antiquated ideas.
All right. You heard it from the New Yorker himself.
All right. That's it for this week's audience questions. We will talk to you Monday.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.